I'm Corey Simonson. This is be my first, I've been on the board, just filling for someone else, and this will be my first full term myself. So I've been on here a year. And I use the bus, walk, carpool, that kind of thing. So that's how I get around.
Perfect. And then just to wrap up with roll call, some folks we're missing at the moment. Danny Tannenbaum, to my right. And then Gene Schmitz and Fred Allendorf. Fred's one of our newer members. They had emailed ahead of time, said they wouldn't be here. And I'm not sure about Jenny Baker. I didn't hear from her, so. But that's all right.
I didn't either, and I didn't see her today at the office to know if she was making it.
Okay. Cool, no worries. And then I'm Ryan Uris, at the moment the acting chair, and I've been on the board for 3 years, and this will actually be my last meeting, I think. So, anyways, but get around town, a little bit of everything, but when I can and when time allows, biking and walking is my preferred way to go. But unfortunately, there are some times I do need to cruise around in the car too. So, anyways, keep going.
I'm Robin Welling. I've been on the board about a year now, and I mainly bike and in all seasons, so it's always entertaining, especially right about now.
I'm Britt Arneson. I've been on the board, it's my second term, but the first one was really short, and in the summer I bike, and in the winter I walk, and I care about keeping people safe while they do that.
I'm Whitney Meek, and I'm happy to be on the board. I do a little bit of everything as well. I bike, bus mostly to work, and then I have 4 kiddos, so a lot of times I do have to drive around town depending on where I'm going, but I'm very passionate about commuting, especially I work for the health department, and so I do a lot of worksite wellness, trying to encourage other folks to commute sustainably as well.
Awesome. Well, welcome, Whitney. Yeah, thanks for being on the board. And as I mentioned before, Jenny Baker and Fred Allendorf are our newer members as well. You guys will probably see them at the next COW, if not the next full board meeting. All right. And previous minutes. Any updates, changes from those? I know we don't have them right in front of us. Nor am I sure. Were they set out?
I don't know if they were set out. Let me look at previous minutes here, because I already have the... those are COWs. Those are COWs. All right, gotta fix some links in this webpage, maybe.
Oh. And where Ben is right now is a reminder to folks, and Whitney, this may be new info, but on the City of Missoula website, and Ben, you're probably going to go over it earlier, but
yeah.
all this stuff is posted. Just know that it's accessible online. So it looks like we don't have minutes for today. We'll skip over that. We may have 2 sets of minutes to approve for next week. How about the current agenda? Any additions, subtractions?
Here I can, no, we don't have minutes because they were, 10-2 would have been our day, right? Yep. So here's minutes if we want to look at them. The main things were the ambassador recap. And Walk and Roll Sunday Streets recap. The conference recap. And an overview of Project 529 that we're going to go into a little bit more today.
Does anybody have any updates or changes to the minutes?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
one
know that this, I don't remember saying this exactly, and I can't back the stat up that of the bikes registered on Project 529 program that are recovered up. Oh, yes, actually, I can say that. Never mind. That's just worded a little funny, but yeah, that makes sense.
Sounds good. Well, without any changes, we'll approve those minutes as they are. And current agenda, anybody have anything to add or subtract? Sorry, we kind of jumped around.
I'd like
Did you
to
have one?
move just the welcome, item 7.1 up to like as soon as we're done with these first few items,
Sounds like a plan.
before doing my comments and update.
Okay. Perfect. Sounds good. Thanks. And since there's no public comment, we'll go right to welcoming our new board members.
All right, so yeah, thanks for being here, Whitney. Was hoping we'd get all three, but maybe now we can encourage them to watch the video and go back and read the minutes. So the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Board was established in the early 90s, I believe, to help provide some guidance to the city on any issue related to biking and walking, and that's since been refined a little bit through and codified in the Missoula Municipal Code. Specifically, it's here in Chapter 2.96 that establishes the Bike Ped Board. The main duty is to respond to requests from city government for advice regarding potential city activities. We're also considering biking and walking issues raised by members of the board or public, and when appropriate, providing advice to the city regarding them. Participating in processes for development of projects or plans which have an impact on biking and walking in Missoula, and potentially implementing incidental activities which support biking and walking in Missoula. That covers volunteering at the bike ped counts or Sunday streets, or helping fill out surveys, or whatever sort of thing. Again, you guys are a volunteer board. There's no requirements of your time other than that to serve, you be an active board member. But you guys are providing advice back to the city on how what we're doing is impacting biking and walking. There's kind of an understanding that we can't right all wrongs overnight, and that there's definitely a potential to get way in the weeds on things, and sometimes that is really, really helpful because it can highlight something that we didn't know was an issue, and then we can correct it on everything moving forward, and sometimes it just bogs us down. And so I think between us, we do a pretty good job of navigating that, but that'll just be something to consider. We're not evaluating every panel of sidewalk that might be installed and saying, hey, is this or is this not the best possible piece of pedestrian infrastructure? Instead, it's kind of bigger picture, more whole numbers sort of thing. So the scope is that you can provide input and advice regarding the long-range transportation plans, and then the more specific, the capital improvement program, which is the major, every year the city puts together a capital improvement program to show in the next year what big projects are going to move forward. And then that comes through onto the proposed public works projects list, which begins being developed about now, gets put out to us for review in January or February, and then we comment on it February, March, April sometimes, and then I try and implement it in the spring and summer as projects happen. Any other projects that the city might bring to the board's attention, activities to increase biking and walking. So this is more of our encouragement programs, such as Missoula in Motion, and things like that, and activities to educate Missoulians about safe and responsible biking and walking. And so that's my program and Missoula in Motion, and how we're, and enforcement really, and how we are encouraging safety. In return, it's kind of my job. We don't call me out by position, but by default I'm there, and we might eventually change this to call my position out, but we will provide requests for input and advice on appropriate matters. So we will do our best to let you know when is the right time to comment on a project, so that we're managing any sort of, well, how do I say this? In the past, there have been times when the city did a poor job of bringing in an item to your attention, and the board caught wind of it and said, oh, hey, we should really be consulted on this. And then it slowed a project down, and people have all emerged frustrated. The board was frustrated they didn't get included. City was frustrated that the board was weighing in after the fact and maybe recommending things that weren't in the current plan and that sort of thing. So it's up to me to try and bring you things in a timely manner. Specifically, and this is where I think you guys can be very helpful, is advising, or I can help advise you guys about processes and project development, and so that you know where where the project is in the scope of, in the grand scheme of things, and then you can provide some meaningful feedback. And typically, the earlier the better on projects. The problem is that they can be years away, and so you could make comments on something, they get incorporated, and you've served your time and have moved on to something else before the project actually gets built. The flip side of that happens too, where something came to the Bike Ped Board 4 or 5 years ago, and there are some decisions made, and a lot of project development has happened in that interim, and then it goes to be built, and then the current board is like, hey, we never saw this, and how come we're not involved? And so again, it's my job to try and inform you guys as to is to involve you as best as possible, and then inform you like when the ship has sailed or that sort of thing. And also not just providing the information, but providing like the actual documents so that you can review stuff and do that in advance of meetings. And then, oh, and here it is, they do call me out, so that you can utilize my office and, my role as the communication between the city and the Bike Ped Board. The ordinance establishes membership, so there are 9 city residents, and really it's appointed by the mayor, and the terms are staggering, so that they overlap. And the meetings shall be, all meetings shall be open to the public in accordance with open meeting laws. So we typically have two meetings a month. We have this one as the full meeting, and then there's a committee of the whole meeting, which happens on the final Tuesday, so a week before this one. That's a place where we often, if there's a recommendation coming forward from the board, we might spend some time at that meeting actually doing the wordsmithing as a group and not wasting the time at this meeting doing that sort of stuff. We do follow the public open meeting laws, and occasionally we do have some public, but it's not televised. It's not the main, and we don't, as a practice, we try not to make motions to really do anything at those meetings. It's more of discussion time, and it's a little less formal than this. There's also bylaws for this group, and I guess I'll take you to the website first. So if you're on the city's homepage, you can go to Your Government, Boards and Commissions, Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Board. And so you can see that the meeting is 3 p.m. first Tuesday of every month, with some notable exceptions. At the January meeting, maybe even the December meeting, we will set the calendar for the next year. And so we knew that Election Day was going to be a holiday this year, so that was why we're on the second Tuesday of the month this year, or this month. And you can see current agendas. This should be old agendas, but I believe this is going to take me to committee of the whole agendas and not actual, oh, no, there they are. Nope, that's committee of the whole. Okay, so I will get this updated to make more sense and be the right page. But yeah, agendas and minutes. And then board resources. Let's see what's included in this. So here are some old recommendations that the Bike Ped Board has made. And so I will update that as well. And make sure that that is, because there are more recent recommendations than those. And then it talks about the committee of the whole. And then that has agendas and previous agendas and minutes for that. A list of who the members are. We don't have contact info on the page. We generally provide comment to the Public Works Committee, although of City Council, that's the kind of way that something happens. If there's a project happening and we bring it to the board and we say, okay, hey, we're planning California Street, how is this looking? If there's a written recommendation, then the board will address that to the city's Public Works Committee. And so they meet on Wednesdays, and then the Wednesday before, any action they take would be the Wednesday before the next Monday's council meeting. And so then there are also bylaws in addition to, and this is the wrong ones. So I have the right ones right here. So these were revised back in 2015. Shows what ordinance we operate under, what the procedures are, that there are non-voting members that can be here, such as Ryan today, that there are officers, and so yeah, I think that we're going to work on revising this a little bit. This says board chair shall be responsible for preparing and distributing any and all board meeting agendas. I guess responsible for just means that they need to, maybe we can interpret that to mean that they tell me to prepare it. And so it's, these were written when Bob Wachtel was very active, a former board member, was very active and engaged, and he really liked making the agendas. I think that we've found, since he stepped down from being board chair, that it's kind of a daunting responsibility to ask for folks, and it's well within my purview to put together the agendas. It would make more sense with how other boards work that the staff person does that. And that the board chair shall act as representative of the board whenever necessary. That's also a little overly broad, or maybe overly exacting. I think that other people have expressed interest in being representative of the board at times, and I think that it would be good to allow and encourage that. So these might need to be opened up again in the not too distant future. Vice chair would lead a meeting when the chair isn't there. And so basically what we expect out of a chair, I think, is to conduct a meeting by following Robert's rules, more or less, and by being equitable in the distribution of speaking time to board members and making sure that people are having their voice heard and that everyone is being respectful of each other. So we nominate the board chairs in November, so at this meeting, and we'll, I guess we probably should have had that as an official item on the agenda, but I think we can do that without it. That, yeah, the date and time is agreed upon, that conduct, we have a quorum. Oh, Mason's rules of legislative procedure. All right, maybe we need to look at that too. I think that is just a kind of softer Robert's rules. That there's public comment. So that people, as long as you notify the chair prior to a meeting, the absence isn't a big deal. But, excuse me, we'd like people to not be absent more than 4 times in a year if possible. We have committees. We currently only have a committee of the whole. In previous times, we've had committees. We had 3 at one point. We had an infrastructure committee, we had an education committee, and we had maybe an executive committee that was trying to help put together, you're trying to help schedule a year out, and like what are the things that the board wants to look at. I think that we provide just as valuable input to the city without so many meetings, but it's definitely entertainable if the board so chooses. Bylaws can be amended at any regular meeting by a vote of at least 2/3 of the voting members. So that means that if only 6 people are here, they can still vote on bylaw changes. Conflict of interest, again, everyone should just disclose if they have a conflict of interest. In the past, we've had planners and engineers that work at firms that get city contracts on the board before, and their expertise was certainly valued and valuable, but at times they had to recuse themselves from votes or discussion because they could be the person ending up voting on a project, or bidding on a project, rather. And that's it in the bylaws. And so I wanted then to zoom out a little bit and say, okay, so the board is here, you give advice to the city. Well, what does that mean, and how does the city, where does the city take advice, and what do they do with that advice? And so one of the things that we have been looking into is updating and making a flow chart as to what the Bike Ped Board does, and how does that, what does that look like, and how do we, when does the board weigh in on things, essentially? And so this is a kind of early chart that I've made. We don't have full buy-in from all the departments yet, but this is something that we generally follow already. We just aren't, I think there's a little hesitation from some city departments to put this in writing for fear that if they happen to miss one, that they get chastised severely. And I don't think that's the purpose. I think the purpose is just to have staff members on the same page to know that we're bringing things to the board in a timely manner. So for infrastructure projects, for a major road, we're going to bring it at design concept and 30% drawings. And so a recent example that this board has been asked to weigh in on is the redesign of California Street between 3rd and Milwaukee Trail, essentially. And so the project manager and the consultant on that have come in at the design concept phase, really in the pre-design phase, to say, hey, this is coming up, and these are some ideas we're kicking around. And then at the next phase, which was kind of, this is the concept that we've landed on, do we have your approval for that? And so somewhere between now and an actual final plan set, we'll probably ask them to come back to the board and say, hey, does this meet what we had said before, or here's how we incorporated comments from the board, here's how we chose not to. And so they present and gather information prior to design, and then 30% engineering is basically, it's designed enough to not just be watercolors on a map, but it's not designed to the point that any major changes would be very costly to make. And so, again, the idea there is that it's not, we're not looking at the difference of a half-inch grade in the sidewalk. We're looking at, is the sidewalk on the right side of the, if we can only put it on one side of the street, is it on the right side of the street? Or if, how are we planning a striping and that sort of thing. New street on a local street, if it's greater than a block, we'll try and do design concept in 30%. If it's less than a block, we'll only bring it to the board if it's deviating from some of the national guidelines that we follow for creating good bike and ped spaces. If it's a roadway reconstruction on a major road, we will, again, bring you design concept, same thing with local street for a major, for a long stretch. If it's just, piecemeal or less than a block, then we'll only do it if it's a deviation from kind of established practice. Sidewalk projects, if the city is ordering it, we'll try and bring it at the project development stage, just so that you're aware that, hey, this is where we're planning sidewalks in the next construction season. If it's private development, and it gets installed. The only reason we would bring it is if it's deviating, again, from those guidelines. If it's private development and it's deferred, this is one of them that that there's some question on, then we'll try and bring it to the board as soon as possible and explain the reason for deferring. I don't think that that's one where we can really impact that decision. That decision is likely made already by the city engineer and by the development services director by the time that we would come and tell you that. The point of us coming to tell you would be so that if you see development happening and sidewalk not being built, you would all have an understanding why and be able to communicate that with your networks. And so an example of why that would happen. So when private development happens, they're required to build sidewalk adjacent to the property. But if there is a known, especially if it's funded, but if we know that there's another project that's going to come in and rebuild the roadway, then we're not going to ask the developer to spend a bunch of money on curb gutter and sidewalk only to come in and rip it out and redo it ourselves a few years ago or a few years later. Instead, what will happen is we'll make the developer either commit money at that time, or we will bill them for their required piece when the project actually moves forward. Sometimes it's a combo of both. They do a little money up front and then the rest when it actually gets installed. And so, again, we would like to bring that to you just to let you know that that's happening. For a shared use path, all sizes, public and private, we'll try and bring you design concept and 30%. That one might be a little ambitious. I don't know that we have that I can do that for all privately constructed shared use paths to that. But again, intersection crossing treatment, same thing. We're going to try and bring those to you guys as soon as we can, both at design concept and a little ways down the road. For maintenance, for arterials and collectors or other bike network routes, we'll do it at project development. And the reason is that this board was instrumental in helping establish a complete streets policy, which says that anytime we do maintenance that erases the striping on a major road, that we'll try and put in better bike and pedestrian facilities. And so if we know that a road is going to get chip sealed or something, then we want to bring that to this board as soon as possible and get some advice on what they want to see, what you guys want to see down in the new section. For a local street, we would only do it if we're deviating from established guidelines. For policy, anything that impacts or influences the use of transportation options, we'd like to bring you concept and pre-approval, and we'd like to explain the proposed work, solicit feedback, present language for adoption, and then seek a recommendation to present to council. This is one where, with the complete streets policy, the board was very, very instrumental in helping get that adopted. You know, there were other people that recognized the need for it, brought the concept to the board embraced it enthusiastically, and when the proposal was when the language was developed, it got brought back to the board and said, this is exactly what we're proposing, and the board said, hey, that sounds great to us, let us write you a letter of support to go to city council, and so the board did that. For planning projects, for transportation, for long-range and specialty projects, we want to bring you the scope of work, alert you to public participation opportunities, and then bring the actual plan to you pre-adoption so that to get a recommendation from you guys for that. The one that will be coming to your attention soon is for pre-adoption is the Pedestrian Facilities Master Plan. So hopefully we'll have that for you guys to review in the not too distant future. And that's a culmination of about a year-long planning process. For land use, the growth policy, we will alert you to public participation opportunities and try and bring it here pre-adoption. Because the growth policy has a lot of language about walkability and bikeability and the benefits of a city being easier to bike and walk in. For neighborhood corridor and infrastructure plans, we will try and involve you at the same stages, although that can be a challenge because sometimes the neighborhood leadership teams are not as well connected to what the city's doing, and so they just might not even know that, hey, there's a board they should come and talk to, and I might not know that a neighborhood is trying to plan. And so we don't find out until a little bit later in the process. And then some of the corridor plans are led by private property owners and not by city planning offices, and so there's only so much that can happen. But again, we will definitely bring plans to you pre-adoption for evaluation. This one, variance conditional use and right-of-way vacation, if they impact people biking and walking, I said try and bring them prior to the Board of Adjustments and or City Council, and that got some pushback from planning staff just saying that is not, these board meetings aren't necessarily timed right based on when those things move forward, and how do we evaluate what's an impact to someone biking or walking. And so we're operating on a kind of know it when you see it mentality on that one, but there is definitely room for things to get missed, or for things to for poor communication to happen. So let's just try and if you guys hear of something, ask me about it. A recent one that comes to mind with this was the Brooks section of sidewalk near like Uncle Bill's and yeah, kind of just south of Baskin Robbins there. And there was basically a trade. The MRA for years had been working out a kind of right-of-way trade with the property owners there to be able to get level that building and get a widened sidewalk in that section. But the sidewalk didn't come out to what we'd ideally like to see on the Brooks corridor, and so this board didn't find out about any of it until it was in the paper. And so Bob said, hey, can we discuss this? Or maybe even Corey, you might have brought it up, but hey, let's talk about this. And so we talk about it, and the board makes a recommendation like, hey, we'd always love to see kind of best practice pedestrian facilities if we're going to build them and we're going to do something for them. And there was some sense that like, well, yeah, we kind of know what those facilities are, but this was already a 2-year-long horse trade with the property owner that we got as good as we could get. And so I personally see value in those discussions and having these discussions. I just don't know that we would have been able to bring that to the board way ahead of time, or if it would have had any different outcome. For grant applications for transportation projects, we will let you guys know prior to applying, especially if it's a big one. We'll try and solicit some feedback on the project or the application, and then we'll follow up and let you know if we got it or we didn't. For new education programs, we will definitely include the board in project development, let you know where we're at right prior to launch. We'll provide ongoing updates and or follow-up summaries. And then for education encouragement ongoing programs, we'll do ongoing updates such as last month's the Bike Ambassadors end of year report. Things like that. And then if there's emerging issues or complaints, things that we learn about or things that you learn about, we can discuss them as needed and explain the issues and explain where we're at with that. And so again, this is an example of the sorts of things we invite the board to weigh in on. And that being said, now I want to zoom out again even a little bit further and look at kind of how projects happen. We'll start with infrastructure projects. How projects happen within the city. I know it's confusing for a lot of people, and I could probably spend a whole 2-hour meeting just talking about that, but I'll try and keep it tight. And Peter, feel free to weigh in on any of this because your former work with an MPO, you know the process pretty well also. So we'll start. I just used an acronym, MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization. Any city greater than 50,000 people in the United States is federally mandated to have what's called an MPO, a Metropolitan Planning Organization, whose job it is to distribute the federal funds that come for transportation projects. And so there's probably a dozen different funding sources outlined in the transportation bills that the MPO then gets an allocation and they have to distribute them. And so they don't just get to choose where they go based on who they like best or what projects they like, but there needs to be a public planning process that happens and that gets updated every 4 years. And so there's a long-range transportation plan that's maintained by the MPO. Missoula being a pretty small MPO, there's really only 2 governments involved. It's the city of Missoula and the county in Missoula County. The MPO in Seattle is probably 3 counties and 19 municipalities and something like that, and probably
It's separate. It's a federal agency separate from the city. So you sit with the federal employees. You don't sit with the city. So unlike Aaron's position where he sits here in offices run by the city, you actually sit in a federal office.
Yeah, so it's there's scales. We're definitely on the small end. Our MPO is 4 staff people, and the governing board is called TPCC, the Transportation Policy Coordinating Committee, and that's the mayor, 1 city council person, 2 county commissioners, a health department or a health board member, a planning board member, a mountain light board member. I believe that's it. And then there's a technical advisory committee that then reports to the TPCC. And so I sit on that, Public Works Director, Planning Director, Ellen from the MRA, Donna Gockler with Parks and Rec. We have Sarah Cofield from Health is there, and some folks from MDT. Oh, that's right, the MDT, the regional director of MDT is on the TPCC, and then some of his engineering staff is on the TTAC, the Technical Advisory Committee. And so we are tasked with every 4 years updating a long-range plan that looks at existing conditions and projects out further what traffic is going to look like and where it's going to be, what growth is going to look like and what that's going to do, and then how much money we can anticipate based on previous and current funding levels, and then have some sort of quantitative method of allocating that funding to different projects. And so the next time that kicks off, the next planning process will actually kick off next year. I can't believe it's been 4 years already. It is kind of flying by, but that planning process is over a year long usually. And so projects end up in that list. And so, for example, Russell Street, the first year that Russell Street ended up in a long-range transportation plan, I believe was 1996. And so construction is just happening now after gathering all of the funding sources. But that's the sort of long-range planning that is conducted. So for something smaller scale than a major widening and a bridge replacement and land purchases on either side, for something that's a little bit smaller, like let's use that California example. That's an MRA project, so that one's has an odd funding source as well. But the idea is that a need is identified through the plan, a funding source is identified through the plan, and then it's developed. Whether it's the MRA, the redevelopment agency, or city engineering, will develop a scope of work, hire a consultant to do the engineering, and they'd work closely with the agency that's sponsoring the project, and they would try and accommodate as many needs and uses as we can into the project. We'll put funding together and then construct it, and that whole process can take, I'd say, as little as 1 year and as long as 4 or 5 years, even for a small project. And then you get into the major reconstructions like Russell, and you're looking at a generation. It takes a really long time to make those happen. So there are, again, because these timelines can be long, there can be there can just be turnover in this board and people cannot know that a project happens. And especially there are some projects that are certain sizes that fall through the cracks and that just don't get funded because they're needed but not big enough that like people are working together to put multiple funding sources to make happen. And maybe not important enough, or they're of low enough importance that if a budget is tight, then council can justify kicking it down the road another year. An example that comes to mind there is at Orange Street and Stevens, right by the Missoula Aging Services, where you really get pinched if you're on a bike rounding that in your southbound. There's been a project identified for 4 or 5 years now to put a curb cut in near the Sacagawea Apartments and then build some shared use path through the corner and then drop bicyclists back out into the bike lane where it picks up on Stevens. That is just expensive enough to not be in a regular work plan, but not expensive enough to actually, and not a high enough priority to actually put a big project together to make that happen. And so that one has just been kind of kicked down the road for a few years, and I believe it was again this year. So there are, and any project that comes up will try and be as forthcoming as possible about how what funding source this is and who's leading it and why we're asking right now for feedback. But it's even with there being somewhat of a uniform flow chart, every project ends up being a little bit different in how it happens. Sidewalk projects, for example, are ordered in by the city, and perhaps you're aware, but they are subsidized. So the sidewalks are by code are the responsibility of the adjacent property owner, but we have come up with a way. We've dedicated a certain amount of money, I believe it's $600,000 a year of road district money to offset some of that property owner's responsibility. And so I'm happy to go over the details with you, but suffice to say that it's about 1/3 of the cost goes to the property owner and 2/3 goes to the city. And it has made it easier to get sidewalk built in neighborhoods where people are struggling. It has not increased the amount of sidewalks that we get built in the city. And so in those projects, we are, like I mentioned, we're at the tail end of a pedestrian facilities master plan. Before that, we had just been using a rolling 5-year plan developed by engineering staff that was based on institutional knowledge and some amount of, there was a matrix of like intensive land uses that would generate a lot of trips and moving out from there. But the data was not collected in one place, and you wouldn't be able to replicate exactly what was in that plan. So we're moving into a more quantitative, more transparent plan that looks at a whole host of factors, including socioeconomic factors for where we should prioritize sidewalk funding. That being said, we're still at 80 to 100 years out for completing the whole sidewalk network in the city. And unless funding changes dramatically, that will not change. We do not currently have a funding source for standalone bike projects, and we have a pretty amazing bike network for that being the case. We have a trail system that crisscrosses town, east and west, north and south, that was finally connected last year with that remaining 6-block gap near the mall. We have non-motorized bridges across the river in places that aren't, in addition to the non-motorized facilities on vehicle bridges. But again, all of that has happened piecemeal and opportunistically. It has not been a comprehensively planned network, and we have not had dedicated funding for at least 5 years for bike ped projects. Of those dozen or so federal funding sources I mentioned, there used to be one called CTEP, Community Transportation Enhancement Program, and that allocated funding for bike ped projects to cities based on some complex calculation of population and lane and roadway miles. And 2 transportation bills ago, that program got rolled into, and we used to receive some Safe Routes to School money. Those 2 programs got rolled together, the funding got reduced, and they became competitive at the state level instead of being allocated to the city. Since that's happened, and we have not been super successful in applying for that money. One of the reasons, and I don't want to go into them all, but one of the reasons is that a lot of our low-hanging fruit has been plucked. We have the trail system, we have a good sidewalk network, we have, we've established the things that we can establish. The remaining projects are harder to do, they have challenges and risks, and are less attractive to fund. When we're competing against the one main street through a smaller town that needs sidewalks because it connects downtown to the one high school, and everyone in the town says, yes, we want this to happen, it's a lot easier for MDT to go in and say, hey, that's the one we're going to fund. We're not going to fund a difficult pedestrian crossing of brooks that we don't even know people will use if we install it, that sort of thing. And so, there's no dedicated bike project money. We've been asking City Council for the last couple years for it. We do, again, as a city, through our Complete Streets policy, we do a good job of incorporating bicycle and pedestrian facilities and features into other types of construction projects, but that doesn't mean that those construction projects are the highest priority for biking. An example, we spent a few years getting 3rd Street reconstructed between Russell and Reserve. It's a great project. It has wider sidewalks, it has bike lanes, it has bus stops, it has a center turn lane for vehicles. It works better for everyone involved. If you had asked 25 bicyclists in Missoula, what is the most important bike project that we need to do? I don't know if any of them would say 3rd Street between Russell and Reserve. And so, again, I'm not looking a gift horse in the mouth. I don't think that putting bike lanes on that road is bad by any stretch. Just, I'm using that as an example to illustrate that what gets built isn't always the highest priority in our bike plans. And same thing will become true when we have adopted the PED plan. It'll be really interesting to see what happens when we do get this plan adopted, how that might shift how sidewalk projects are developed. Any questions? That was a lot of talking. So there are the other way, and I alluded to this earlier, the other way that projects get developed is through private development. And so that can be as small as someone redoing their house and adding 200 square feet of floor space, and then of additional footprint to the house that would trigger building the sidewalk in front of their lot. You'll see, especially on the north side, there are blocks where there are a new house in the middle of a block, and there's brand new sidewalk in front of that house, and there's nothing on either side. And again, that is, the hope is that things will develop a little more comprehensively than that, or redevelop a little more comprehensively than that, but it's, and that's just the requirement, is that you put in the sidewalk.
What you see some houses that have sidewalk at the curb, and then sometimes they set the sidewalk back. So what implementation device makes that decision?
Yeah, so there's city code that requires that we say that all sidewalks shall be boulevard sidewalk unless it gets exempted by, I believe, if it's private development, it's only the Development Services Director that can exempt that and make it curbside. And one of the reasons that we would do curbside would be for topographical reasons. So we follow ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then, we also adhere to PROAG, the public right-of-way accessibility guidelines. And so that's a federal document that says, ADA says you need to make things suitable for people of all abilities. And what PROAG does is say this is how you do that. And so that document is kind of always changing. It's been in draft form since 2011 and has been updated probably 3 times without ever being adopted, because we're always learning more about how to make facilities better for people with different abilities. And so one of the things that PROAG says is that you can only have a grade of a running slope of up to 5%. And if you're between 5% and 8.33%, then it is a ramp. It's considered a ramp and not just a normal sidewalk, and you need to have a landing every 30 feet. And they provide a big exception to that, and that is if you are following the grade of the road, then you can just follow the grade of the road and you're technically meeting ADA. And so on any of our streets that are steeper than those 5, or really than 8.33%, or even steeper than 5 if you don't have the room to do landings, we will put the sidewalk curbside so that we can still, meet the letter of the law, if not the intent, and make those roads ADA compliant, or make those sidewalks ADA compliant. Another instance might be just right-of-way constraints, that there just isn't a lot of right-of-way. It's really interesting how right-of-way differs around town, and how some of our major roads have really narrow right-of-way and some of our minor roads have huge right-of-way. The slant streets, I believe, most of them have 100-foot right-of-way in there, and Greeno Duncan Drive has 40 feet of right-of-way. And so when the time comes to put sidewalks on Greeno and Duncan, that will be a challenge to be able to actually get those in there, because we'd want bike lanes on that road as well. 40 feet is not enough room for sidewalk on both sides, bike lanes and 2 travel lanes. And so there will need to be trade-offs that get made when that happens. And what that looks like, this board will have some input into. But yeah, good question, Peter. So there are different ways that things get built. Things look differently. There are times, and it's very easy for a lot of us ride bikes, and it's very easy for us to think about biking, maybe more than we think about walking. We spend more time discussing biking than we discuss walking. And my take on that is that there's a few reasons for it. One is that law does not do a good job of accommodating bicyclists, that it does not recognize that bike riding is kind of an intermediary, that you are as vulnerable as a pedestrian, but you're also only mobile in really one direction, forward, more like a vehicle. I mean, you can go side to side, but you can't jump back out of the way of an oncoming thing. And so law just doesn't recognize some of the uniqueness of riding a bicycle, and as such it kind of says, well, you're a motor vehicle unless you're not. And so there's a lot more room for discussion about what that means and how we should accommodate bicyclists within the right-of-way. The other is that another reason that we spend more time talking about biking than walking is that there are multiple different facility types for riding a bike, whereas for walking there's basically a sidewalk or a shared use path. But for biking, we can talk about painted bike lanes, we can talk about buffered bike lanes, we can talk about raised and separated bike lanes, we can talk about shared space where maybe traffic isn't that high or that fast, and so we can just have bikes ride in the road. Maybe then there's trail also, and so there's I think different contexts and different considerations for biking than for walking, and so that is something that we hear and we understand, and we do need to consider walking more. But there's and then the final reason that I think we do is that biking is much more likely to replace a motor vehicle trip than walking is, because walking is more a function of the land uses in proximity rather than the type of facility that you have. And so if you have a grocery store 500 feet from your house, the likelihood that you're going to walk there is high regardless of whether or not there's a sidewalk between you and that grocery store. Whereas that grocery store could be 2 miles away and you could bike there frequently if there's a safe and comfortable and convenient bike route to get there. And so, again, I think that's why this board ends up spending more of its time talking about biking than walking. But we do need to keep in mind that we are the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Board and that we need to be thinking about what's good for people walking as well. Any other questions? So that was kind of broad overview 101 of the Bike Ped Board and city process and how projects happen. If you have any other questions, so if you're lying awake in bed tonight and you're thinking about this meeting, as I know you will be, and you think of a question to ask, don't hesitate to email me directly, or if you think it's big enough that it needs board discussion, again, we are subject to state open meeting laws, and so we can't be having discussion online, even though those are FOIA-able. The the city attorney has still said that any sort of discussion needs to happen per a publicly noticed meeting. So it's something that we can add to the agenda. Just let me know and we can get it on next month's agenda if you have questions that you think need discussion. With that, I think we can move on.
And just to add on that last point, I think that's really helpful when, everybody gets their information a different way, whether it's reading the paper or through Facebook groups, Instagram stuff, whatever. But, bring what you see, bring it up to the board, because it may be something that maybe Ben had planned on talking about it, and we can say, yep, we got that one checked off the list, or maybe not. Maybe it's something new or different or further down the road. So, when you guys can bring those things, it really helps. So.
All right, so we moved 7.1 into up above, and so I think that I would like to just go to my regular kind of update and comments.
Sounds good.
And then go to 7.2 after that.
Sure. And then actually while we were talking, I just in my head lumped it into 7.1, but I think we should add a 7.3 nominations for chair or vice chair.
Yeah, okay, let's do that.
Okay with that. So
maybe let's make that a 7.1A. Maybe we should do that now before going into the update.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not? So like Ben was saying, from the bylaws, so officially for the record, we're adding, you got it, okay, all right. Yeah, we would nominate a chair and a vice chair. Typically, those are voted on and confirmed at the December meeting. I would say maybe we even do that today if folks are feeling comfortable with it. But essentially the way we do it, we take nominations, whether it's self-nominated or one can nominate another board member for those positions. And the only ones that that we've received and talked about as a board to date, Gene Schmitz has thrown his hat in the ring for either chair or vice chair. And the only other two, Britt and Danny, have mentioned that they want to be board members only. So with that, I'll open it up. Any nominations for chair or vice chair?
I'll nominate Gene for chair.
Okay. Thanks, Corey.
I'll second that nomination of Gene.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Peter. Anybody else jumping in for chair or vice chair?
I feel really weird about doing this, but I'll put my hat in for vice chair.
Okay.
Hate self-nominated.
All right.
May I suggest we unanimously approve this?
Well, sure.
I do.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess, Ben, can we do,
I think we can, even with Gene not here. He gave his approval at the last meeting.
Yep.
We have video evidence of that.
right?
Yeah, I'll communicate with him and let him know that he was nominated and approved as chair, and that we will develop the agenda for the next meeting.
Okay.
If he throws a fit, then I'll let the board know that we'll redo nominations again in December.
Okay, sounds good. We should probably do a formal motion.
Yeah.
Does anybody want to bring a motion to the table?
To vote on the nominations of Jean Schmidt for chair and Corey Simonson for vice chair.
Okay, the motion on the table. Any further discussion? Perfect. All those in favor of Jean Schmidt's becoming the chair and Corey Simonson becoming the vice chair, signal with aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And aye. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just want to express a little bit. This is hard for me to do. As a Minnesotan, we are all about holding back. But as a member of the board, I've been pretty disappointed with the balance of discussion. It feels very often like there aren't many opportunities, or maybe there are opportunities to voice our opinions, but it feels like a large majority of the meeting is devoted to sharing information, which is really valuable. And I appreciate that many members have some really useful information to share, but as someone who's really busy, and I often wish that that information could be delivered perhaps beforehand in some kind of a summary, so that there are more opportunities for back and forth among board members, members of the public, and anyone else who might be in attendance. And I just also feel like there are some voices that are more represented, and I would just encourage members to think again about the importance of, if you are someone who is more vocal, maybe take a step back and move into more of a listening space. And if you are someone who, like me, might be more reserved, maybe I need to step up more and share some of what I have to bring. So I just think, moving forward, I would like to see this board make more of an effort to have really meaningful discussions and more back and forth. And maybe we can take some time at a future meeting to talk about what that might look like. And I guess I would be curious to know if other people have felt similarly as members of this board. So that's all.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Rob. And then, I think that's a good point, and yeah, I think that's something Gene and Ben and Corey and the whole board, you guys can work on and talk about. So, Ben.
Thank you. I think that I, in particular, have not done a good enough job getting information necessarily early. I think that I've done a better job at bringing the right things to the board at the right step in the process, but it's not the right step in your guys' schedules to facilitate great discussion necessarily. And so that's one of the reasons why we developed this spreadsheet, to show where in the process things will happen. The next step for this, for me, is getting tacit approval from staff members to get commitment from them to be able to bring things to me in time to get to you, because sometimes I don't find out about things until 2 days before the meeting, and then I'm scrambling to gather information. But other things I knew the Thursday after, I find out tomorrow about something, and I think like, oh, okay, I need to bring this to next month's meeting. I can let you guys know ahead of time that this is going to be on the agenda, and this is what I'd like feedback on, and then you guys can think about it. So I can do a better job not just getting the agenda out earlier, but actually getting supporting materials along with it. And so duly noted, Robin, and I will work to get those out, like hopefully the Friday before, when I get out the COW agenda, I will try and get out any supporting materials that I know will be coming up for the following full board, so that there's like a week and a half that people have to look at things and think about them before coming to this meeting. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I think that would be great. I mean, it often feels like you have, just a wealth of information to share with us, and that's really pertinent to the sort of, to some discussions we might have, here. And, so just if there's a way to maybe shift some of that delivery of information to, in the form of like PDFs and things prior to the meeting, such that we can come, as informed board members to have those discussions and maybe spend more of our time, hashing things out and, and clarifying points that are, unclear, rather than, sort of absorbing, a lot of information and then being expected to have, something to say about that.
With the rules that we're under, as far as open meetings, are you hamstrung by giving out early information?
No, what we're hamstrung in is having discussion about it. If I send out a plan for a new trail, you guys you can't reply all and say, hey, thank you. Can it include a dog watering fountain, and can it include a bench for my grandparents? And we can't have that discussion on email, but I can definitely send you guys, hey, these are the items that are going to be on discussion. We're looking for feedback in relation to items X, Y, and Z on this project. We're anticipating a construction date 3 years from now, and we want to know, is this too curvy? Is this the best bike ped facility we can get on this property? Or, something like, a couple, just concrete discussion items. We can definitely do a better job of asking you exactly what we want you to weigh in on.
I know you weren't trying to single anybody out, but I'm sorry that I talk so much, and I'll try to remember to, talk less so that other people maybe can have more to say, because I think, there are some of us who do quite a bit more talking than others, and sorry for my role in that.
My intent is certainly not to, signal anyone out in particular, but just to say that I think as we are having elections, it seems like an optimal time to sort of think about what's working and what isn't working about this board. And so, just if there are things that, maybe, I haven't thought of, or, I'm sure there are other ways in which we could, make this an even more, effective board than it already is. So just doesn't have to be right now, but just, moving forward, I think it would be good to have some of these, discussions that encourage some reflection, even if it's not always easy.
I think thank you for the reminder, and I think it is hard, it can be hard to see how effective this board is on a month-by-month basis, and it really is the cumulative effort and the kind of the constant reminder to certain staff members that, hey, there are people watching these things, and that we need to be beholden to a public, not just an imaginary public that might call us, but a group of 9 individuals that are volunteering significant time to represent that public. And so I think that I understand it is a challenge to see the concrete impacts meeting by meeting, but again, the overall impacts are big and are felt.
Awesome, and I think, you guys have a unique opportunity to do that now too, with and you've got 3 new board members and kind of a shift a little bit. And, I know even at the beginning of last year, Ben, we talked about kind of even just some changes and different approaches to the sport. And so I encourage you guys to keep that going and keep evolving, right? So, awesome. Well, Danny, we made you chair and vice chair. No, I'm just kidding. Totally kid. But we did nominate, and there was a motion for Jean to be chair and Corey to be vice chair. And we were just kind of talking about it. Were there kind of, as we're having this discussion, and thinking about the email Corey sent earlier, most of it was about this meeting and chair, vice chair. Corey, was there anything else from your email that has not been answered yet?
Actually, my email with the question about the board secretary position, I had realized that I was looking at an old copy of our bylaws. The current ones don't have that in it, so that's where my confusion came from. It's like I'm looking at old documents here. So I didn't realize that I was looking at the old one until you showed us this one today.
Yep, and that was when we had a much better, or we developed a good working relationship with admin staff at Development Services, and we have Sean over here taking minutes for us and making sure they're uploaded to Sire so that we are super official and that we're searchable by the general public and by board members if they miss. So there's audio, video, and the written minutes on that webpage.
And then Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember Bob saying once, Bob Ochtel, our former chair, that for the COW meetings, there was no specific standard, there was nothing we were held to, but that if we wanted to appoint somebody at those meetings, that it was absolutely, we were capable of that. And so if that's something you, Corey, or anybody else on the board would like to see, that's absolutely something we could do. Is that right?
It is, yeah. We do follow public meeting laws, but we do not necessarily have official minutes and agendas for those meetings.
And those never got officially posted. I believe Bob put them on a Google Drive.
Bob has a Google Drive, has a Google Doc with all because he used to put out a little audio recorder.
Right.
And maybe even write up minutes afterwards.
He'd do both. So yeah, something to think about for the next COW. Cool. I knew there was something else. So thanks, Corey. All righty. We'll move it along then. Ben, should we go back up to your program update?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. So the month of October was very interesting. Some of you maybe read an article in the paper which talked about what consumed a lot of my month, and that is the eventual arrival of bike share and scooter share to Missoula. This is something that I came into work one morning towards the beginning of October, and someone said, "Hey, guess who just submitted a business license application?" One of the scooter companies. And so we were like, oh shoot, does that mean that they have scooters in a shipping container out by the airport, and as soon as we approve this business license, they're going to be everywhere? What are we going to do?
Can you tell me what a scooter is, please?
Yeah, I'll show you a picture even. Basically it looks like a Razor scooter, but it has an electric motor in it.
And how fast do those things go?
That's exactly what it looks like. They go up to maybe 15. I think most of them try and keep the governor at 12. Whoa. Yeah. And so the question is, are these things even allowed? How are they classified under state law? How are they classified under local law? Where do they operate? Where don't they operate? who handles complaints, how do we handle complaints, all of that sort of stuff. We had to get all of our ducks in a row before these things can come out. And we have some sort of competing directions from up above. I know that some institutions have wanted some fairly strict regulation and guidance about how and where these things can be used and how many can be brought and how many companies can be here and that sort of thing. And some city administrators feel that those are questions best determined by the market, and that we should take as light a touch as possible and allow the businesses to sort themselves out. And so having to navigate that has been interesting, because what is emerging as best practice is somewhere in between. You know, luckily we're not the first city where these things might come. We can learn a lot of lessons from places that have had to deal with things like this. And so the idea behind this is that it's $1 to unlock, and then like 13 cents a minute or maybe even more. Maybe it's like, no, that sounds about right. 13 cents a minute. And so that if you rode for like 10 minutes, you'd pay $2 or something like that. And you'd probably be able to go 1.5 miles in that time, you know, so it could be a commute in this town. They are unlockable with a smartphone, and all the companies have a way, if you're non-smartphone inclined, that you can like call a number or text a number, and they will, when you're next to the bike, and they will, or a scooter, and they will unlock it for you. They have kickstands built in and gyroscopes, so they should. What I'm hearing now is that the scooters yell at you if you leave them knocked over, or some of the companies make you take a picture of the scooter parked correctly, so before it will end your ride and stop charging you, to make sure that, to try and gain better compliance. Where we've landed, and we don't have the official language, and we don't have it yet in the process to actually update the language will involve a public hearing at City Council. We don't have the ordinance language yet, but we will bring it to the board before it goes to council. Hopefully at the December meeting, we'll have a draft to show you guys that basically there is a category in state law, there's a category of vehicles called motorized non-standard vehicles, which basically describes scooters. It's unclear if they were for, if that category was developed for, what do you call segways, or they even mentioned pocket rockets. That was by brand. That was a brand of mobility device 10 years ago or something. So, anyways, there is state law that has a category for these, and then they go on to say that category, motorized non-standard vehicles, are not allowed anywhere unless a city adopts language to allow them. And so they basically, state says we don't want any responsibility for these, but cities can do what they want. And so we are in the process of adopting language about how these things operate and where they go and that sort of thing. And so we're going to do some minor revisions to code, because again, we've been instructed to take kind of a soft touch, but one of the things that we're going to require is a right-of-way use permit. And as part of that right-of-way use permit, we will attach a contract or an agreement between the companies and the city, basically saying that, you know, every vehicle that they deploy will have a phone number on it that someone can call if it's a nuisance, and that they can respond within 2 hours during business hours and within 24 hours on non-business hours, and that the city is held harmless for liability for any incident resulting from someone riding or parking one of these things. We are not going to, currently the plan is to not allow them on the sidewalk, but we plan to allow them on the trail system. And that is that involves some discussion, but largely that's where staff landed. And so one of the reasons that we don't see these as any different than e-bikes necessarily, and people are already riding e-bikes all up and down the trail, let alone that it's currently prohibited. People even use scooters on the trail, even though that's prohibited. And when the ordinances were written to prohibit motorized vehicles on the trails, these things weren't even a glimmer in the people's eyes. It was really to prohibit people from strapping lawnmower engines into their mountain bike frame and riding those up and down, or Vespa type scooters, actual mopeds.
When you said hold harmless, would that also involve, like, if I was walking down the trail and got hit by one of those, the city wouldn't protect me? I would have to sue the company if I got hurt?
No, it just meant that you couldn't sue the city.
Okay. Yeah, because that seems like a benefit to the city, but maybe not to the bystanders near these things.
Yeah, maybe.
And that concerns me a little as someone who's probably not going to be paying this company to rent one, but will be sharing city space with them.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't it be just like getting hit by a car, though? I mean,
hopefully not.
Well, right. But
no, but in terms of like
cars, you're required to have insurance, though, so I do think it is a little different.
Okay, yeah, that's
and
true.
If the company has too many lawsuits and goes bankrupt or whatever, I don't know. It just seems it seems like if the city's granting this permit, that I don't know that we should give that up so easily. As citizens, are the city's responsibility for what these things are going to do.
Interesting point.
The permit is for the company, right?
Yeah, the permit would be for the company.
And that permit requires the company to, you mentioned, like, put a number on the side for complaints. What other requirements do you think it would?
Oh, it'll include data sharing. So all of these have GPS in them, so they show point-to-point travel routes so that we can use that for planning, like where are people going and what numbers, where do people want to go, that sort of thing. There will be probably some language in the agreement about how the company will provide education to users about proper usage and parking technique, where they can and can't operate, that sort of thing. I haven't seen the exact language yet, again, that we will propose, but there's kind of a best practices guide put out by the National Association of Bike Share, NABSA, I don't know what the A is, but anyways, the final A. But there's a group that is kind of industry and regulators, and they're kind of coming to these guidelines together based on what seems to work best for everyone. So we'll probably hew to that as close as possible.
Okay, but these regulations wouldn't apply, these rules wouldn't apply to people who just buy one on their own?
No, they would apply to the share companies.
Okay. And so the ordinance, no use on sidewalks, that applies to?
That would apply to the type of vehicle, not to the company.
Okay.
The use agreement would apply to be able, basically, to allow them to park them on the sidewalks, and operate, basically conduct a business entirely within the public right-of-way. That's why they would have a right-of-way use agreement that they would be beholden to.
Now, continuing with Robin's theme here, is this something that the board's going to get to have any sort of feedback on, or is this just going to be something that we're going to be told, hey, this is what we're doing?
Well, like I said, we'll bring proposed language to you guys before it goes to council, and if you want to recommend changes to it, staff will take those under advisement before bringing to council, but that doesn't, I don't know that that's something that, I guess I can say, point out that stopping these is not an option. Prohibiting them is not a possibility.
I haven't been tracking anything online, but what's the public response been about it?
Depends. I mean, some cities think they're the greatest thing in the world, and some of them have banned them or temporarily banned them while they figured out what they need to do regulation-wise. I mean, San Francisco was kind of Wild West with them, and then banned them a few days later because they thought it was crazy, and then put a 6-month moratorium on them, and then wrote regulations, and then had an application process for companies to come in. And then the only companies that passed the test were not the kind of big national ones, but they were San Francisco specific startups. And so, and I think they're so far liking the results of that. Other cities have gone free for all. Some cities have worked with 1 or 2 companies and brought them in, and then it's been fairly smooth. Yeah, it's all over the board. The companies are saying, though, that the scooters are what's making the money. I mean, the bike share, a normal pedal bike was just not profitable, but that the e-bikes are fairly profitable and the scooters are really profitable.
Have you heard anything from the university about their feelings on this matter?
Yeah, I mean, Jordan Hess with Transportation has been part of these discussions, really from, he's been leading the charge in a lot of ways, more than I have. In part because the university's presence here is why these companies are even interested in Missoula in the first place. I think that a high percentage of young people is what's attractive about our community. I think that we're on the smaller end of cities where these would be viable. And I think there's those of us who are working on it, I think there's some guarded optimism about how viable they will be here. I mean, this is a city where people are pretty active already, and for the most part, pretty can take advantage of choices that they want to make. I don't know that this is one that people will, but who knows, maybe we'll be wrong. I think that the university was one who initially said that they didn't want 5 different companies coming and, vehicles of all different types of shape and color, littered all about campus. But and again, the city doesn't quite see it that way. We're saying, hey, that's a market decision. So that being said, all the salespeople that we've dealt with from the companies don't want to do anything to upset a major institution, whether it's the city or the university, in a community this size, because that will really harm their chances for success.
I know we'll get more information about this when we have the proposed ordinance or changes to the ordinance, but legally they'll be the same as bicycles except without the ability to bike on the side, be used on the sidewalk. Is that approximately right?
Yeah, approximately. Again, we're deferring to the state definition of motorized non-standard vehicle, and creating that as a category within Title 10, where we talk about bikes and operations, traffic operations. We'll just make reference to, using that same category and just saying this is where motorized non-standard vehicles would be allowed to operate.
And so the proposed ordinance wouldn't be specific for scooters, it would be just incorporating motorized non-standard into them as well?
Yeah, exactly. And the goal there is that I think that I'm not convinced that scooter is the final design that will, the 5 years from now, we might have something that's totally different.
I've seen like the motorized skateboards around town.
Exactly, and hoverboards were a thing in other cities, not maybe here, but...
Finally, the hoverboards. Waiting.
Well, no, I don't mean the Back to the Future. I mean the kind of Segway without a pole. Have you seen those?
We'll have to change our name to the Bicycle Pedestrian Hoverboard Advisory Board. It's a little redundant with the boards.
So I guess look forward to some ordinance language for next month to evaluate about what about how we can handle these things. And then as for, I think we have a little bit of time because I think that these companies, they fired their warning shot across the bow right as the weather was changing, and we were able to say, hey, to increase your chance of success, you'll want to wait till spring at this point to do any sort of launch. And that gives us time to get code written and changed. Again, if they came here tomorrow, they wouldn't be technically allowed to operate anywhere because that state law says that these things are not allowed on any public right-of-way. Like people who use them in their driveways. Are there any questions about how these work or how they operate or anything like that?
Do they have charging?
No, so people can sign up to be individual chargers and earn money for taking them home and charging them between $5 and $20 per scooter per night. So you can, one of the companies called Bird, and they're called Bird Hunters, and you go around and you collect them. When they're out of juice at the end of the day, and then you bring them home and plug them in your garage, and then you have to deploy them by 7 a.m. and you get paid for each one that you do. And then Lime is the other company that we're looking at, and the people that harvest those are called juicers, and they go out and collect the scooters and plug them in and redeploy them. In big cities, there's like roving gangs of people that are out collecting them, and they're more money if they're in difficult to find locations. If they're like in an alley or behind a dumpster, it'll be more money than if it's like right out in the front of the block, that sort of thing.
In San Diego, I saw a guy who would go around after dark, and he'd have one scooter and have 7 different scooters on either side. I don't know how he did it, but he would do the same thing and take them and charge them at night.
And he was probably making like $200 a night doing that. Who knows what his power bill was, though. So yeah, that was an unexpected large amount of my work plan in October, was kind of conducting meetings, getting everyone on with various agencies, Parking Commission, Downtown Association, engineering, attorneys, police, anyone who might field a complaint about these in the future, or might have, Parks and Rec, might have cause for concern or reason to weigh in, trying to get them all in the same place and talking about this stuff and making sure that we're covering the bases that we need to cover. Another thing that we were working on is Missoula in Motion underwent a strategic planning process in the spring, but there was a lot that was kind of just got put on hold during the summer busy season, and so we did a lot of kind of finalization of language and in the strategic plan for Missoula in Motion, and my office is kind of tangentially related to that, so a lot of the bike safety and education components I had a lot to weigh in on, and then the encouragement stuff as well. And so there will be, and maybe I'll get them to present that strategic plan at next month's meeting. They're going to do a presentation at next month's TTAC and TPCC meetings, I believe, just as an informational item. But yeah, this is what the strategic plan says. This is how we plan to implement it in the next 1 to 5 years. And so had that going on. Spent a day working with Mountain Line, nearly a full day actually, working with Mountain Line. They received a grant to upgrade all of their stops along routes 1 and 2 to meet ADA, and to also adhere to their bus stop master plan. They have a plan that says that based on number of users or projected number of users, we want either just a pole with a sign on it all the way up to a shelter with bike racks next to it and benches and trash cans and things like that. And so going through and looking at which stop type should be at which stop, and if we have the chance now, should they move a half a block, or should we, could we move 2 that are kind of far away and there's one in between? Could we move those a block in each way and then eliminate the one in between, or that sort of thing? And so we spent a day going through that, and so we're going to look in the not too distant future to see a plan from them, a kind of comprehensive plan or project rather, the actual engineering drawings. One of the things there, though, that we This was a question that needed answering sooner than I can come to the board, but it's a little after the fact, but I'm curious what you guys think. A little after the fact for this project. I'm curious what you think moving forward, though. 4 bus stops that are on streets that have parking and a bike lane. Where should the bus stop? Maybe I'll just ask that as a question before I tell you where we landed. So parking, bike lane, 1 travel lane in each direction, say South Avenue.
What do you mean by where? Like, on which side of the parking, or which side of the block? Or what do you?
Yeah, well, I mean, well, okay, that's a good distinction. So, the city's preference is they stop what we say is downstream from every intersection, so on the far side of the intersection, so that they're not blocking the view of pedestrians crossing the street. But no, I mean like where in the cross-section of the road, you have the travel lane, should they stop in the lane? Should they pull all the way to the curb? Should they do some combo of those? What would be your preference?
Aren't the bus stops painted yellow so they can pull in next to the curb?
They are, but again, they had received a grant to do some construction work, and so is there an opportunity to change those, and what can it look like?
This may not be the solution everywhere, but I know I appreciate when the bike lane is dashed and the bus goes through it. I think that tells me as the bicyclist that, oh yeah, this is a bus stop sometimes, or, yeah.
Okay, I don't know if I gave you enough info to weigh in on this. So part of what makes a bus stop ADA, what makes a bus stop accessible is that it has a 5-foot wide by 8-foot deep landing, so that someone in a chair can be waiting for the bus, the ramp can fold all the way out onto the concrete, and then the person is far enough back that then they can wheel up the ramp onto the bus. And so these sidewalks here are only 5 feet wide, and so they need 8 feet. And so then the thought is, do they try and extend into private property 3 feet, or do they extend out this way some amount and to get that and make a stop area? And so where we landed with them is that we would prefer that they bulb out the bus stop about halfway into the parking lane and make a landing here. And then that would mean that when the bus is stopped, they're completely blocking the bike lane and they're blocking half the parking lane, and the stop itself is taking up the rest of the lane. And the thinking there was that as a bike rider, it would be safer to either know that you have to slow down and wait for the bus to finish stopping and move out, or go into the travel lane entirely to pass it, rather than if the bus pulls all the way to the curb and the ramp, for someone in a wheelchair is back here, then the bus is kind of half blocking the bike lane, and it's putting the bike rider right in the blind spot of the bus, if they stay in the bike lane.
I guess maybe I don't understand what the issue is. If bicycles have to operate as if they're motor vehicles, why would it be a problem to make bicyclists stop behind the bus, wait for the bus to go, and then continue going? I mean, am I understanding the problem correctly, or what? Yeah,
and that's what I'm suggesting should happen in practice, is that, yeah, the bike rider can stop and wait for the bus, or they can get out and change lanes, essentially, and then pass the bus.
So, what was your solution? They bulb out towards?
They bulb out towards, so yeah, it would bulb out this way.
Into the parking lane.
Into the parking lane, and so then the bus takes up the whole bike lane and part of the parking lane. I think that what the perfect solution would be, even though they got this huge grant, it's a kind of once-in-a-generation opportunity for them. They've never been able to do anything like this. It still isn't a ton of money in the grand scheme of things. I think that I think that some staff people, both at the city and at MDT, are not quite on board yet, but I think that the ideal solution would be to have the bus landing all the way out at the edge of the bike lane, so the bus is stopping in the travel lane, and then the bike lane would swerve behind the bus landing and then keep going this way.
Oh, that's a expensive endeavor.
It is, and it's what is NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials. They have a NACTO, or they have a design guide for what a transit stops and stations should look like, and so that's what they would suggest. But again, we decided kind of early on that was too heavy a lift right now, both money-wise and kind of politically with some of the people that we need to get approval by. But yeah, that the bike lane would go behind where you board the bus.
So would that make it accessible for those in a wheelchair getting on and off the bus?
We would make it in a way that it would be, yes.
Because I know, being on the bus quite a bit, watching, folks try and get on and off, I hear a lot of comments about how certain drivers don't pull up close enough to the curb, and so I just want to make sure that would be accessible for everyone.
Part of being in a wheelchair is they have to pull a distance from the curb because the ramp goes like 4 or 5 feet. And if you roll off that ramp and you're close to the edge of the sidewalk, you're gonna eat dirt.
Yeah. So here, there would be an accessible walkway here and here on either stop of either side of the landing. Again, this is envisioning a denser area and a bigger city. And so we're not quite there. But again, here's an example too. The bus stop is right here, the bike lane comes behind, and then it comes back out where the parking lane is. But yeah, the idea is that this walkway and this walkway would be accessible routes. But again, we're not able to do this. Instead, we're keeping the bike lane and putting this, basically shifting this way, and so that the bikes are fully blocked by this is where the bus would be, and that this green, the bike lane and the sidewalk, is what the new landing will be.
Does Mountain Lion have a policy that they stop in the streets, or they always pull to the side?
Not yet. They want to stop in the street, but they're not. Again, we're just not there yet as a community.
Yeah, because in Portland, all buses stop in the street regardless.
Yeah. So that's one that, timing didn't. When they initially did the designs for their stops, they didn't know that they might get the grant. They were just kind of doing an exercise to see what these stops would look like. And then all of a sudden they got a grant and have very limited time to spend it. And they had the designs, one of the reasons they got the grant is that they had these designs mostly done already. So this is one where it's not a city-led project, it's a Mountain Line-led project that we're all kind of behind on, and I think that we'll bring something to the board to look at, but I don't know that it will be an informational item more than a gathering feedback item, but it will be useful to help gather feedback for moving forward and how we want them to do designs or not. But basically, when given the choice between partially blocking the bike lane or fully blocking the bike lane, I made the call with Mountain Line, with Vince at Mountain Line, who had my job in Bloomington, Indiana. We decided that it would be better to fully block the bike lane than partially block it, because it wouldn't communicate to bicyclists that they might have the space to squeeze right next to a bus. Instead, you either wait for the bus or you take the full lane away from it.
Compared to the alternative of putting it in, I just worry that people would park there, and then the bus couldn't stop. You mentioned the alternative was that it would go under that tree, the island would, or the extra 8 feet, and then people could just park there, and then sometimes the bus might not even be able to get there.
part of the project will be actually striping the parking prohibitions at bus stops and then asking that police enforce those. One of the things that Whitney was referring to is sometimes it's the driver, but sometimes it's just that people are parking in spaces that prevent the driver from getting as close to the curb as they would like.
Are you concerned at all about the buses not pulling out of the traffic lane completely, and so maybe they're like occupying maybe a quarter or a third of the traffic lane, and then so drivers behind them will be like, I think I can just cross over the double yellow line and sneak past them?
We were specific with them that the bulb out is going to stick out far enough that the bus would not stick out further than the outside line of the bike lane. So each place to stop is going to be specifically engineered based on the width of the bus so that the edge of the bus comes to this line.
You said routes 1 and 2. Is this every stop on routes 1 and 2?
Every stop on Route 1 and 2 but we also looked at each stop and said, is this one necessary, or should it move a little, a half block to the north, or could it be combined with this other stop based on, and we so looked at ridership numbers, looked at a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah.
So there will be some reorganization of where stops are and how they work, but every one of the stops will at least get upgraded to ADA, if not new amenities as well.
I live on Beverly and Arthur, a few blocks east of Bonner Park. And the bus stop is by the end of my fence, which is like halfway down the block, and they would be wise to move it to the edge, because it would work better.
Peter, I'm going to put you in touch with Vince, because that is one of the stops that we spent some time looking at, so.
I've had bus drivers move up to the alley and just let me off on the street level in the alley.
It's a challenge over there, that's for sure. Let's see, other thing, just kind of regular meetings and stuff going forward. Oh, the other development project, and this is a private development that will result in some trail happening, and pretty sure the board heard about this as part of the right-of-way vacation, but up at the top of Scott Street, this project, maybe you've seen this one in the paper too, but it's Scott and Otis, this parcel right here is going to be a large-scale affordable housing project, 200 apartment units going in right here. And there's, believe it or not, there's city right-of-way that goes like back this way. Like, this is a very steep hill right here. And so as part of the development wanted to the city to vacate the right-of-way back here so that they could build right up into the hillside and be able to maximize use. But we had identified there being a need for a trail to connect the north side neighborhood all the way up to Granite Creek. And so we said, well, we will vacate the right-of-way here if you build trail along Otis and then along Shakespeare, so that we're getting from Scott Street to the edge of the property in a different way. And so they agreed, that was a condition of the right-of-way vacation, and then we've seen a very preliminary idea of what the trail would look like, and we just kind of said, hey, you need to meet the national guidelines for trail width and clearance distance and turning radius and things like that, so that it's actually a shared use path and not just a wide sidewalk. With only 5 minutes left, I kind of want to move on to 7.2, and that's part of the discussion. Something else that I did this month was got together with Ethan Smith from the police department to talk about Project 529, or the 529 Garage, and we had a couple phone calls with the CEO and a salesperson, but this is a bike registration, an international bike registration program developed by one of the developers of Xbox. And the idea is that who had about $10,000 worth of bike stolen costs when he lost a really high-end mountain bike from the top floor of a parking garage that was key code entry only, and that was triple locked to the back of his vehicle in Seattle. And so he said, this is crazy. We need to do something about bike theft. He developed this, it's basically an app. Anyone can download it and register your bike for free. Takes about 4 minutes. It's probably even easier than the city's registration form. And what they do is they are trying to sell the service then to law enforcement agencies or to municipalities or both, we could search, if we were to buy it, we could have access to searching their database. Any bike that we found, we'd be able to run it against their database and know that we have it. Stickers are optional. Registration stickers for the bike are optional with this. But the idea is that the front end is very easy for the user to register their bike, and the back end is very helpful for law enforcement to recover bikes. And it's searchable. If a bike gets stolen here and it's found in Kalispell, they would find it easy. Whereas with our registration system, the Kalispell PD doesn't have access to our spreadsheet on our local server. So there are serious recovery benefits to a program like this. The question that we come up with is basically, there is a fee. It's $1,000 a year for the base product or $5,000 a year for their kind of full service, which is what they recommend. Of course, they recommend the more expensive one. But basically, it gives police departments a lot more features for the recovery room and for identifying bikes and looking them up. And one of the things it does is it searches partial serial numbers or slightly incorrect. If you were to mark your serial number as a 5-1 instead of S1, it would say, hey, maybe your bike is this one, that sort of thing. It's, like I said, it seems like a very cool program. Vancouver has seen, they were increasing bike thefts by 40% a year or something outrageous. And then 2 years ago, they launched this program, and since they've seen a 30% reduction. So not only did they not see bike theft go up, but it's actually deterred bike theft. And they've also they've been able to return recovered bikes to a lot more folks because they've done a concerted effort with this. So one of the things we also are trying to figure out is, if we were to spend the money as a city to participate in this program, how do we then get the word out to bike shops and to the general public about registering bikes and the importance of registering their bikes through this? And the company says that they help, that they offer events and with marketing materials and things. And I even brought some to pass around. But yeah, that's kind of what we're kicking around right now are we not only spending money but adding work for ourselves? And does it do enough compared to our existing registration program? Does it do enough to justify that expense? And I don't know that we have an answer for that, and I don't know that I expect one in the next 30 seconds from you guys, but it's something that I think is just an ongoing discussion. We're not going to make a decision before New Year's, and so, and we talked about it a little bit at last week's, and that was kind of last month, and then it was a little bit after September when Ethan came and talked about kind of the state of bike theft.
Is there any cost to the system currently have?
There is, in the sense of, yes, we buy stickers. We spend probably we buy about 1.5 to 2 years worth of stickers at a whack at a price of $1,200 to $1,500 for those stickers. So yeah, we're spending close to $1,000 a year now just on our program. And then there's time associated with all the people that come down to our office and register bikes. But that wouldn't change. We would still help people register bikes. And in fact, we might even, to make it really effective and make our investment worthwhile, we might spend more time trying to get people to register bikes. One of the neat things that this company does, though, is that they make it really easy for bike shops to register, and so they can do it even a few different ways. One way is they could register every bike that they have in their inventory, and then when they sell, just transfer that registration to the new owner, or they could sell registrations as part of the service, or throw it in for free. Or they can even dump in, if they have a modern database, Lightspeed is one that I think a third of bike shops nationally use. It's like a POS system for bike shops, that if they use that, then they can dump all of their previous sales records into the app, and then those bikes will automatically be registered. The company is very protective of privacy, and so they collect very little information on who actually owns the bike. It's really just either a phone number or email address, and then the make, model, color, serial number of the bike, and that's about it. So that's even less information the city currently collects with registration. And they have ways for you to upload photos of the serial number and of the bike itself. So if you have specialty parts on it or anything like that, you'd be able to identify it. When we ask all the same questions that kind of continue to plague us, like, well, what about all the bikes that someone registers and then they donate them to Free Cycles and never told us that they donated them, and then the bike gets stolen and we find it and we don't know who the new owner is, we only know who the person that donated it to Free Cycles was 5 years ago. Does this stop that? And they don't give us a good answer to, it's only as good as the users ultimately, but the cities that have made a major push on this are seeing improvements over the way they had been doing things. And we know, Ethan tells me, and I'm pretty sure he was open about this at the meeting where he presented, is that we get beat up as a city for all of the bike theft that happens, and that it's something that we know is an issue. It happens a lot, but again, there's the valued amount, even though we can all agree that isn't maybe the best measure of worth of a bike, is its monetary value, but that is what drives how serious an investigation can be. We also know that people don't have, Ethan says that less than 10% of the stolen bike reports is the person able to identify their serial number. And so it's just not good record keeping by people who are losing bikes. So he's kind of desperate that anything we can do to try and reduce bike theft and increase the likelihood of returning a stolen bike to someone, he's willing to try it. But I will send out all the digital information that I have to the board. That's something you guys can look at yourselves, and then come back next month and we can talk more about it. But that's something that we would, especially if you think that we should maybe hold off on this is something that we would like to know sooner than later.
It'd be interesting to talk with municipalities that have used it. I know they're touting a drop in theft in Vancouver. It'd be interesting to talk with your counterparts in Vancouver and any other places that have either implemented it or tried it and didn't implement it. Mm-hmm. Just to see, what their experience was.
Yeah. Regardless, I encourage you to download the app and register your bike with it, because again, if your bike gets found in one of those communities that does implement it, they will be able to return it to you.
Awesome. Anything else for Ben on Project 529? Looks pretty slick. That'd be cool. All right. We'll wrap up. Thanks, Ben, for all that info today. And as always, I'll wrap up with general comments. Peter, you got anything?
the city is doing the downtown master plan, so you have bones issues with the downtown area, what your vision would be. There's meetings coming up, and we'll probably hear more about them, but stay tuned.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter. Corey. All right. Robin? Britt? Anything with you? All right.
Ryan, I want to thank you for your service for the last few years on the board and for going above and beyond and coming here today and helping conduct elections and finding your replacement as chair.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Ben. My pleasure. Thanks to all you guys for serving with us. So, and I remember, that reminded me, there's also a survey out right now the the MPO has. I saw it in the Missoula in Motion newsletter, but now I'm completely blanking on what it was. I took it though, so check it out. Anyways, our next two meetings, the Committee of the Whole will meet Tuesday, November 27th at 6 o'clock in the Jack Reedy Conference Room, the one just right around the corner here. And then the next full meeting will be back to the first Tuesdays of the month on December 4th at 3 o'clock right here. So thanks, everyone.